Hi, my name is Chris Melnick and I'm a realtor in Halifax, Nova Scotia, but I'm originally from Vancouver and then lived in Toronto and Hamilton for a little while. I've also driven across Canada and the US, even through Times Square, Manhattan, so I think I'm qualified to speak to how driving in Halifax compares to other cities. I'll start with some of the positives. Number one, there's a lot less traffic here than in Vancouver or Toronto. Even heavy rush hour traffic is not that bad. If you talk to people who grew up here, they'll tell you that traffic is terrible and the worst in the universe, but they don't know Vancouver or Toronto. When I lived in Kitsilano and worked downtown Vancouver, it would regularly take me 45 minutes to drive the 4 kilometers home. But Halifax is amazing in this regard. Number two, there are few drivers who are very aggressive and try to cut you off or speed up between cars. We have a different sort of bad driver, which I'll talk about later, but there aren't really the angry aggressive drivers here. Now on to our bad drivers. Number three, everyone merges too early. On one hand, it's great that people try to be fair and all get in the same line, but approaching construction zones, people will merge into one lane as quickly as possible, which can lead to less cars getting through light changes at intersections and just a longer line in general. This then can back up the feeder side streets. Number four, people will often drive well under the speed limit for no apparent reason. This is really common in 70 zones and on highways. People will just go 20 to 30 kilometers an hour less than the speed limit because they feel like it. The conditions can be perfect and there won't be traffic or anything. Number five, people will come to a complete stop on busy roads to let people on side streets in who don't have the right of way. This is one of the strangest things I encountered. I'd suppose I'd classify it as being too polite, but it would be like coming to a complete stop on the Queensway in Toronto or West Broadway in Vancouver to let somebody on a side street in. It was mind-boggling the first time I witnessed this, and there will be a bunch of traffic behind them too. Now I'll talk about the roads. Number six, many streets are not marked, and I'm not talking about small side streets. I'm talking about major roads at intersections. There's just no signs much of the time. There's even a guy on Reddit who put together a list of missing signs from intersections, and just on the peninsula, out of 1,048 intersections, he found there to be 348 intersections that are missing one or more signs. That's about a third. Number seven, streets often change their name constantly for no apparent reason. For example, let's look at Chain Lake Drive. Okay, here we are. We have Chain Lake Drive. It's one of the main drags. You can see all the restaurants, Canadian Tire, things like that. We go up, then Chain Lake Drive actually becomes Lacewood Drive. As you can see, there's no other way it would possibly go. It actually just goes around the bend, becomes Lacewood Drive, Lacewood Drive. Then that continues a ways, and yes, okay, well, granted, here it actually does become smaller, but they still choose to call it Lacewood Drive. Then we'll go a bit further, go a bit further. Then as you can see, oh, Lacewood Drive to Dutch Village, that's a bit strange for no apparent reason, but it gets a bit weirder. It goes Lacewood, Titus, Alma Crescent, which is actually new to me. I hadn't actually zoomed in this much before, so that's a new one. So Titus, Alma, Dutch Village, and again, this is the biggest drag. Dutch Village, then Dutch Village becomes Bayers Road. Then Bayers Road comes down here, and this is, well, they call it the 102. And by the way, the 102 is the highway around here. So you could think, oh, well, if it's an on-ramp or off-ramp or on-ramp to the highway, that's a bit different. But if we go on Google Satellite, we can see, no, this is definitely not a highway. This is just another road. There's intersections and lights. It's definitely just a continuation. And then it goes a bit further past the 102. Now they're going to call it Bayers again, and then it switches to Yonge Street for some reason. And that's that. Number 8. It can be impossible to tell that your lane becomes a turning-only lane. Oftentimes, the only indication that your lane becomes a turning lane is the painted arrow on the asphalt near the intersection. If there's traffic though, it's impossible to tell. Oftentimes the lanes are offset too, so the lane you think should go straight just doesn't. Number 8. Cars will just park at the side of highways to go fishing or ATVing. This was a very strange occurrence because in Vancouver, if you're at the side of a highway, police would come very quickly. In Toronto, if you're at the side of a highway, a tow truck would show up in about 30 seconds and take you to Brampton. But here it's just the parking space for the Forester Lake. Number 10. The paint they use for the road markings is not reflective. Apparently this was to save money, but it can be nearly impossible to see the lines if it's raining at night. This is even more apparent if you're in a lower car, as your viewing angle catches more glare from the wet road. I only drive at night in my SUV for this reason. Number 11. Potholes at the end of winter can be very bad on the highway. Because we get a decent amount of snow that requires plowing, it can do some real damage to the road that isn't fixed until spring. Last year, there was a time on a certain section of the 102 where over 6 cars were at the side of a road at any given point of time due to pothole-induced punctures. So top tip, do not drive with low-profile tires in the winter. That's anything with less than a sidewall ratio of about 50. I have two 55/55 18s on my SUV and have had 0 issues. Before I came here, I had stories of terrible roads and thought they were cobblestone or something. But generally, the quality of roads is great. It's only towards the end of winter that some parts are bad. In conclusion, I would much rather drive here than in Vancouver or Toronto. It's a night and day difference. Driving here is generally enjoyable, whereas in Toronto and Vancouver, I'd avoid being on the roads from 7:30 to 10:30 a.m. and 3 to 6 p.m. because the entire time was rush hour. Even when talking about bad drivers, you can get used to these habits and adapt. And if you have a higher up vehicle with a decently profiled tire and a GPS with a good screen that tells you what lane to be in, you'll get around just fine and think it's some of the best driving out of any bigger city in the country. As always, I hope you got some value out of this video. My contact information is in the description. Goodbye.